The open sea can feel eerily calm, with only the creaking of sails and the crashing waves breaking the silence. But in an instant, that calm can be shattered. Strange movements stir beneath the water, shadows of massive animals passing under your boat. Then, without warning, the danger strikes. Your boat is rammed by the ocean's top predators. As you glance around, a pod of orcas circles your vessel. Lately, orca sightings have surged, and with them, a rise in attacks on boats. What follows is a deep dive into some of the most shocking recent orca encounters that will make you never want to be anywhere near the sea forever. A marine research team studying creatures near Gibraltar was attacked by a pod of aggressive orcas. The orcas were relentless in their attack, ramming the boat so hard that equipment began to fall overboard. The researchers also began to lose their balance due to the constant ramming. With no way to steer, they sent out a mayday. By the time the rescue team arrived, the boat had nearly capsized. The team was rescued with no casualties, but the boat suffered significant damage and had to be towed back to shore. In March 2020, near the state of Gibraltar, a group of fishermen were frightened when a pod of orcas attacked their boat. Like most people, the fishermen were fascinated by the majestic marine creatures, but their fascination soon turned to fear. The orcas began ramming the boat, each hit more powerful than the last. Eventually, they damaged the propellers and the boat was unable to move. Frightened, the fishermen sent out an SOS signal. With each passing minute, the boat became more filled with water. Thankfully, the Coast Guard arrived not too long after the distress signal was sent. When the Coast Guard arrived, the boat was partially submerged and the force from the ramming had thrown one fisherman overboard. He was lost to the sea. The Coast Guard tried their best, but it was already too late. In Gibraltar, a fishing crew was attacked by orcas. The fishing crew had been attacked by orcas in the past, but this particular attack felt different. It was much more aggressive and fiercer. The orcas went straight for the rudder, ramming it repeatedly and causing the boat to spin uncontrollably. Usually, when the fishermen run into similar situations, they make loud noises or shoot some flares, and the orcas would go running off. However, this tactic didn't work for this pod of orcas. The orcas continuously rammed the boat, and not long after, the boat gave way, and water began to seep into it. As soon as the crew noticed the water, they realized the situation was bigger than they could handle, so they sent out a distress signal. The rescuers arrived shortly after the boat began sinking. Thankfully, no lives were lost, but one of the crew members got injured in the chaos. Some years back, a luxury yacht cruising near the Canary Islands was suddenly attacked by a pod of orcas. What they experienced on this boat cruise became an event that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. What began as a day of luxury quickly turned into a day of terror within seconds. The orcas took them by surprise, surfacing beneath the yacht. The people on the yacht had no idea that a pod of orcas had surrounded them. The orcas introduced themselves with dramatic flair, ramming the yacht multiple times. The passengers clung to the nearest rigid object for dear life. After a while, large amounts of water made their way onto the deck. The captain, realizing the situation was beyond his control, made a distress call. As time passed, the yacht slowly began to sink. A few minutes later, the crew and passengers were rescued. The only casualty was the yacht. A speedboat was being chased down by a pod of orcas. The boat was fast, but the orcas were able to keep up, swimming not too far behind it. The longer the chase went on, the closer the orcas got. Soon, they began to bump into it. The driver, panicked, increased the speed, hoping that would lead him away from the orcas, but the orcas were able to keep up with the boat's new speed, hitting their bodies against it as the chase continued. The force the orcas used was enough to damage the boat. The passengers, scared for their lives, put on life jackets as water began to fill the boat. Thankfully, they had already gotten close to a ship. All but one of the passengers were rescued. The missing passenger drowned in the chaos. A fishing trawler off the coast of Spain was attacked by a pod of aggressive orcas while on a fishing adventure. The crew noticed the orcas and hoped they wouldn't come their way, but that never happened. The orcas launched an all-out attack on the fishing trawler, ramming into its hull violently. The crew realized that the orcas were out for blood, so they decided to fight back using every single thing at their disposal, from sticks to fishing rods, in an attempt to scare the orcas away. Soon, the boat started leaking, with water seeping into it. The crew realized they were fighting a lost battle against the orcas, so they sent out a distress call. The boat was now partially submerged with 2 crew members clinging to debris. Unfortunately, one crew member was nowhere to be found. Soon, the rescuers came to save the 2 survivors and began a search for the last crew member, but they were too late. He was already lost to the sea. A sailor was sailing in Spain when he noticed the orcas circling his boat. He shot flares at them in a bid to scare them off, but it was to no avail. The orcas began ramming the boat's rudder, and the boat began to fill with water rapidly. The smart sailor quickly put on a life jacket, took his radio, and contacted the nearest Coast Guard. However, before the rescue boat arrived, disaster had struck. Debris was found, but the body was nowhere to be found. A family went on a sailing trip near the state of Gibraltar, and they noticed a pod of orcas not too far ahead. The children, intrigued, pointed at the majestic marine animals in excitement. Soon, this sighting went from a beautiful encounter to a life-threatening event. The orcas suddenly began attacking the sailboat, and the boat shook violently as the orcas continued to ram the rudder. The family was able to send out a distress call, but not long after, their boat capsized, throwing all family members into the water. The family tried their best to hold on to pieces of their boat's debris, but the current was not in their favor. Only one child survived the tragedy. She was just extremely lucky. The rest of her family was tragically lost to the ocean current. A luxury yacht near the Azores was ambushed by a pod of orcas. The orcas approached the yacht and got right down to business. They began ramming it multiple times. After a while, the rudder was damaged and the boat lost control, with water flooding the lower decks. This sent passengers into a panic. Scared, the captain sent out a distress call. Before help arrived, the yacht had already sustained a hole, causing it to begin sinking. Thankfully, all the passengers were rescued, but the yacht was lost to the ocean. The survivors in an interview stated they were shaken and left in shock by the near-death experience. A family went on a sailing adventure when their little boat got surrounded by orcas. The orcas, in full aggressive mode, began ramming the boat, damaging the rudder. The small boat rocked violently as water rushed in, and the kids began to scream at the top of their lungs. The father managed to send out a distress signal before the boat capsized. The mother and one of the children were rescued. Sadly, the father and the other child were lost to the sea. A solo kayaker near the Canary Islands faced a truly frightening situation when orcas surrounded his kayak. Orcas are known to be group hunters. They hunt their prey together. This solo kayaker was unfortunate to become the target of the pod of orcas, which aggressively bumped his kayak, tipping it over. The kayaker attempted to get back into his kayak, but the orcas' continuous assault left no room for that. After hours, a passing boat noticed the overturned kayak and sent out a distress signal to the appropriate authorities. The rescuers arrived and found the overturned kayak, but the kayaker was never recovered. A solo yachtsman in Spain was caught off guard by a pod of orcas. The yachtsman was someone who loved to enjoy nature, so he decided to go on a solo yacht trip. His trip was going well until a pod of orcas began circling his boat. The sailor tried his best to run away, but the orcas had already disabled his rudder, making his efforts useless. The boat's hull had cracked, and water began to fill the vessel. He quickly donned a life vest and hopped into a raft, escaping the yacht and contacting rescue services to save him just in time before the yacht sank. Now on a raft, he became an easier target for the orcas, who continued bumping the raft multiple times, filling the man with fear. The frightened sailor also shot up a flare to signal passing boats to his location. After being stranded on a raft for hours, a passing cargo ship noticed him and pulled him to safety. A whale-watching adventure off the coast of the Azores went from a fun sighting event to a nightmare. The nightmare began when orcas started attacking the boat. The presence of whales usually signifies the presence of orcas, since orcas are natural whale hunters. Most of the passengers on this boat were children who were excited to see the majestic marine animals, only to begin screaming just minutes later. The boat rocked violently as the ramming continued. The captain had no way of maneuvering away since the orcas had already disabled the rudder. With only one option at hand, the captain called for help. Soon, the boat began sinking. A few minutes later, the rescue team made their way to the boat and discovered that many of the passengers had gotten hurt, and one child was actually missing. The incident remained etched into the memories of the children and the parents who witnessed it. A group of tourists went on a whale-watching tour near the Canary Islands. Their day went from being an exciting experience to an horrific experience they all wished to forget when the orcas attacked. Earlier, as the orcas approached, the tourists' faces were plastered with smiles, eager to capture pictures of the majestic marine creatures. The smile on their faces disappeared when the orcas began ramming the hull. The impact of this action was strong enough to make some tourists lose balance. The resulting effects ranged from simple panic to several tourists injured. Immediately, the Coast Guard got word of what was going on. He sent a team in to rescue the tourists. Not long after the team had completely evacuated the tourists, did the boat begin to sink. Thankfully, some of the tourists just received minor injuries and no lives were lost. A group of kayakers near the Canary Island got caught in a dangerous situation when a pod of orcas began to circle them. The group remained together, as that was their only chance of survival. Constant pressure from the Orcas made one of the kayakers stray from the group. This kayaker became an easy target. The Orcas repeatedly bumped into his kayak until it flipped. He held onto his kayak, desperately trying to flip it back over. The Orcas, aggressive as ever, continued to hit him. His friends were powerless to physically help him. All they could do was race back to the shore to get help. When help finally arrived, it was already too late. The kayaker had drowned, leaving his friends devastated. A yacht club outing in Portugal went from a day to flaunt luxury to a day of chaos when multiple yachts were attacked by orcas. The orcas focused their ramming on the rudders, causing several boats to lose their ability to steer. Soon, the ramming caused holes in the yachts, and they began to take on water. Multiple distress signals were sent out, and within minutes, multiple rescue boats scrambled to the area, assisting the yachts that were attacked by the orcas. One yacht in particular wasn't as lucky as the rest. It didn't just gain holes in its hull, it also capsized, throwing the passengers into the sea. The rescuers were able to save most of the passengers, but one was never found. This event shook many members of the club, leading them to suspend most yacht events in honor of the lost passenger. A father had convinced his teenage children to join him on a sailboat adventure. A few hours into the trip, they encountered a pod of orcas near Gibraltar. From afar, the orcas appeared playful. But just as the sailboat got close enough, the orcas switched from playful to fully aggressive and began ramming into the hull of the sailboat. Since the boat itself wasn't particularly big, each hit from the orcas sent shudders through it. Not long after that, the boat began to crack and water seeped into it. The father quickly let out a distress call. He was quite experienced in situations like this, as his job revolved around conducting marine studies. Despite the father's experience, he had no idea how the orcas could be stopped. Soon, a rescue vessel arrived just as the boat began to submerge, saving the family at the nick of time. A group of fishermen near Gibraltar had a bone-chilling experience on one of their fishing adventures. They went from being the hunters to the hunted, as their boat was attacked by an aggressive pod of orcas that rammed it repeatedly. The impact caused a hole in the boat and it began taking on water. Frightened, the crew sent out a distress signal. The boat's rudder, which is used to control the direction of the vessel, was destroyed, so they had no hope of escaping, at least not by themselves. The orcas relentlessly attacked the boat until it eventually capsized. The panic of the crew members was now at its peak as they held onto the debris of the boat for dear life. The orcas eventually left them. By the time the rescue team made it to the crew, all but one of them were safe. The current had swept one of them away. If you really like this video, then make sure to check out our next one shown on screen.